Hello and welcome to the recorded lesson over Jacksonian democracy and Andrew Jackson's 2 terms as president. Some of the challenges that he faces, some of the decisions that he makes, and how those play out for the country overall. In the last lesson over nationalism and sectionalism, we focused on the emerging sections of the country and their interests between North, South, and West. And in this lesson, we are going to see how Andrew Jackson handles all of those together and how they play off of each other. In 1824, there are a lot of different people running for president, and they're all representative of different regions of the country. Andrew Jackson is supported by a lot of the people in the South. He gets the most votes out of all of these candidates. The second person, John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, the second president of the United States, gets the second amount of votes. And in third, you have Henry Clay, who is supported by more of the people from the West. John Quincy Adams from the North, Andrew Jackson from the South, Henry Clay from the West. The issue that all of them run into is none of the 3 men get a majority of votes, either popular votes or electoral college votes. We kind of have a situation where maybe Andrew Jackson has 40%. A majority obviously would be over 50% of the votes. John Quincy Adams maybe 35%, and then Henry Clay with remaining 25. So none of them have a clear majority. And what we see is that none of them have an electoral college advantage. Because of this, no winner can be declared. And instead, the same thing would happen today. If this situation played out and no clear winner was established, the same thing would happen today as it did in 1824. Congress would have to decide. Now, Andrew Jackson is going to feel very betrayed by all of this because, like I said, he has the most amount of popular votes. However, Henry Clay decides he knows that he cannot win, and he decides to tell his supporters in Congress to back John Quincy Adams. This means that John Quincy Adams has enough support to become the 6th president of the United States. Andrew Jackson, winning the most votes, does not win the presidency of the United States. Instead, it's John Quincy Adams. Now, the problem is for Andrew Jackson is he is convinced that this election was robbed from him because if you look here, after John Adams becomes president, he makes Henry Clay Secretary of State. Now, this is a pretty important position in the United States government. Jackson is convinced that Clay and Adams kind of made a deal with one another that, Henry Clay said, hey, I'll give you all of my supporters if when you win presidency, you will make me Secretary of State. Backroom deal kind of goes on here. Jackson spends the entire time from 1824 to 1828 devoted to making sure that he will be able to win that presidential election in 1828. This is Andrew Jackson. He is on the $20 bill. He is the 7th president of the United States. He is going to end up winning the election in 1828 and then serve 2 terms, 2 4-year terms as president. Also has super intense eyebrows. Jackson ran on the idea that he was going to be representing the common man. He wants to represent that common person, not the incredibly wealthy or anything like that. He wants to expand voting rights to all white males, not just landowners. Before this, it had just been landowners who could vote, white male landowners. Now Andrew Jackson wants to expand the democracy to include all white males, not just landowners. This idea, progressive, good idea, expand voting rights, obviously not ideal because it leaves out women and it leaves out minorities, but it is an expansion of voting rights, which overall is a good thing. This leads him to an overwhelming victory. This idea of widening political rights to ensure that the majority rule is known as Jacksonian democracy. If you run a country on majority rule, but a majority of the citizens in the country don't vote, it's not really majority rule. It's a majority of the minority win. Jackson does a few other things that are kind of outside the norm from previous presidents. He fills government positions instead of with people that are like worthy of the job or qualified for the job. He instead fills it with his friends or supporters. This idea of filling positions in the government with supporters and friends is known as the spoils system. The spoils system definitely becomes tied to Andrew Jackson. This also leads to another thing that Andrew Jackson is known for. Each president does have a cabinet. They have their Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Secretary of Treasury, all of these different positions that are filled by people that are qualified and have to be approved by Congress. Andrew Jackson has that, but what he decides to do is also have a group of his friends be advisors to him as well. That means that he has a secondary cabinet that isn't necessarily as qualified or as approved by Congress. This becomes known as his kitchen cabinet. So I would maybe write down kitchen cabinet next to the spoils system. It's kind of a slang term for the cabinet that he kind of puts together on the side. At the time of Jackson's election, the country is being pulled apart in three different directions by conflicts between these three major regions. The North, the South, and the West. You really don't have to put Northeast. You can just put North, and I think that'd be good enough. There are differences between all of these, like we've discussed in the nationalism and sectionalism lesson. But the key parts here, Westerners wanted public land sold for cheap because if you have an area, so like if the United States is like this and yeah, okay. If there's a whole bunch of land out here that is cheap and then the factories are over here, the problem that the Northerners see is that all of the people that are working these jobs in the factories are going to go to the West, and that would leave the factories empty and no one would be working in them. The people in the South want there to be no new taxes, no new tariffs. The people in the West and the North want roads to kind of crisscross over the United States, trains, but they want it to be paid by the government. The problem is for the Southerners is that those projects are going to be paid by tariffs, and the tariffs are going to hurt the Southern economy. A tariff, you kind of need to do a little bit of understanding about what a tariff is. If you have 2 boxes of goods on the shelf at a store, and each of them are $5, you're really not going to have to decide too much on which one you're going to choose. You're going to choose the one that looks the best to you. They're both $5. With a tariff put into place, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So if this one with the A above it is a product from America, and this is a product from England, the English product would have a tax that was paid, and instead of it being $5, it might end up being $7. Now, people are going to be very much more likely to buy the American product instead of the English product. That is what a tariff does. It increases the ability for American companies to outsell foreign companies. Now, if you look at what this effect will have on the South is that, well, in England, they would do the reverse. So an American good would cost $7 in England and $5 for the English good to try to get back at the Americans for putting their tariff on. So, we put a tariff on them, they put a tariff on us. It kind of goes both ways. The problem is it's going to hurt the South more because the South exports a great deal of things all around the world. So all of those exports, the imports that are going into other countries, the South is feeling the pain on that and not able to sell nearly as much or make as much money off of those exports. The tariff issue does fuel the debate over the the balance of power between the states and the national government. Some people support a strong federal government. Other people support a strong state government, or the idea of states' rights. States' rights are the idea that a state has the right to not follow specific laws that are put into place by the federal government. The tariff hits the state of South Carolina especially hard, and they actually favor the idea of nullification, which means a state is going to have the right to reject a federal law if it feels that it's unconstitutional or negatively impacting their state. Nullification is tricky because a federal law is supposed to be the top law of the land, and below that would be the state law. So if a state law and a federal law go against each other, under the Constitution, the federal law should win out. But a state can have a say in maybe wanting to get rid of something if they truly have a case and feel that it is unconstitutional. Andrew Jackson supports this idea of states' rights. That he supports the idea that a state should be able to control what goes on inside of its own borders. But he does not think that a state should be able to just nullify or completely get rid of a federal law. He wants to compromise with South Carolina. In order to do that, he does reduce the tariff, but this is not good enough for South Carolina. And they go ahead and nullify the tariff. They say, we're not listening to the federal government. We are going to get rid of this tariff. They also vote to build their own army, and they threaten to secede or withdraw from the Union, meaning that they are going to leave the United States, be their own country, start their whole new thing by themselves. Jackson makes it perfectly clear that if they do this, he is going to send the United States Army in and force them to listen to the laws. He's going to force South Carolina to listen to the federal laws. So basically we have South Carolina, the United States government, going at it head to head over the issue of tariff and states' rights. To avoid an all-out fight between South Carolina and the United States, Henry Clay works to compromise the tariff of 1833. Or in 1833. Henry Clay's the same guy that came up with the Missouri Compromise, so he's pretty good at the whole compromising business. This pleases South Carolina, and they remain in the Union for the moment. Because I say for in the moment because you look at this is not going to be a permanent solution to the issue of what a state can do in its borders and what a state can't do in its borders. Because we fast forward 30 years from now, from the 1830s to the 1860s, we are going to still be fighting over the issue of does a state control all the laws within it, or does it have to listen to the federal government? In that case, it's going to come down to the issue of slavery. And states are actually going to secede and going to start their own country, and that's where we'll see the Civil War break out. But for now, this issue is settled, and tensions settle down a little bit. There are other things that Jackson has issues with during his presidency. One of them is going to be the Second Bank of the United States. It is the most powerful bank in the country. Jackson sets out to destroy it. The bank's owner was Nicholas Biddle. He made loans to members of Congress and in hopes that he would influence them when they would owe him money. The way I would describe this is, imagine your parents had an unlimited amount of money and your teachers were borrowing money from them. And then one day your parents came to your teachers and said, hey, we're going to need you to pay all that money back that you owe us. And your teachers said, well, I don't really have all that cash on me right now, so I can't really pay you back right now. But your parents say, well, you know what? Maybe if we can come to an understanding about my child's grades, maybe if they all suddenly turn to A's, maybe we could work out something where you don't have to pay all that money. And your teachers are like, well, that might sound like a pretty good idea. Not saying that any of your teachers would do that. They're all fine, upstanding people, but you have your parents in this situation would have influence over your teachers because of the money that your teachers owe. Nicholas Biddle is doing the same thing to the people in Congress. The members of Congress that owe him money might be able to vote for certain things, might be able to vote for certain things or do certain things certain ways or do different things for him instead of listening to him, or instead of listening to what their constituents want, meaning the people that are in their state. To operate, the bank does need a charter. And Andrew Jackson wants to do everything he can to make sure that the bank does not succeed. When Congress voted to renew the charter, Jackson vetoed it. So he uses his presidential power to get rid of their bank charter. Jackson argued that the bank was unconstitutional because it was a monopoly that favored the few at the expense of the many. Jackson wins re-election in 1832, and he takes that as a sign that means, hey, if everybody voted for me again and I won re-election, that means that they like what I'm doing. They like the fact that I'm trying to go after the bank. So he sets out to fully destroy the Second National Bank of the United States. He removes government funds from the bank and puts them into state banks. Now, one thing that you need to kind of understand as we go into this is that in a bank, this is a drawing of a bank. In a bank, when you put your money into a bank, like let's say you have these dollar bills that are all stacked up like this. When you put it into a bank, when you withdraw it 2 days later, like let's say you put in $100 and then 2 days later you want to withdraw $50, you do not get the same $1 bills that you put in the bank. They don't put it in a little box that has your little name written on it and all your money stays right there. That's not how it works. The bank takes it and puts it out into the world in other investments or loans to other people. If the bank makes loans to a whole bunch of people and those people do not pay them back, then what that means is that the bank is going to run out of cash. If the bank runs out of cash, then when people go into the bank to go say, hey, I need my $100 out of my account, and the bank is like, actually, we don't have any cash left. We gave it all away and nobody's paying us back. We're out of money. Well, that means that the bank doesn't have any money to give anybody and they go out of business. If you went in or you heard somebody say, oh yeah, I tried to go to this bank the other day and they wouldn't give me my money because they said they were out of it, like you would never use that bank because you're not going to trust a bank that runs out of cash. That's what happens to the national bank. He removes government funds from the bank and puts them into state banks. Eventually, the bank runs out of business because nobody trusts them with their money. And Jackson ultimately wins this fight. In the short term, this is a great move, and it does really good things for the economy. The economy booms. People everywhere are buying things, taking out loans from these state banks. State banks are allowing people to issue to take out loans left and right, and the economy is doing very well. However, the banks are actually issuing too much paper money, and they're kind of flooding the economy with too much paper money. This leads to what we call inflation. Inflation is where the dollar is becoming worth a little bit less over time, and also prices increase. I talk about if I had a piece of paper that was just a single piece of paper and it is a document that said you no longer have to take any tests for the remainder of your life. Every test that you ever take is always going to be 100 as long as you present this piece of paper to the person giving you the test. That piece of paper becomes very valuable. The idea of not having to take another test is very valuable. And if you were to offer me $1,000 for it, I bet there'd be somebody else in the world that would offer me $10,000 for it or $1 million for it or whatever. Now, if I sold that to somebody for $1 million and I said, this is the only one in existence, that means all the value of not having to take a test is in that one piece of paper. But if then I said, well, actually, I've got 5 more here that I just found and I will sell them to 5 more people. Now, I might be able to get $1 million for each of those, but now I have 6 of them instead of just 1. And then if I said, well, actually, I got thousands of those sheets of paper and I can give them to whoever I want. Now, each of those becomes worth a little bit less because I can make them anytime I want. I can print them as much as I want. They still mean the same thing of not having to take a test. But if everybody gets one, then there's no point in paying $1 million for it if everybody has access to it. That same thing happens with the dollar. If you print too many dollar bills, the value of them becomes less, and then prices go up. So if a gallon of milk costs $1, and the person that produces that milk, the company that produces that and sells that milk, if they need to make $1 off of the milk in order to, continue to be a company and to continue to succeed, they're always going to need that worth of $1. But if $1 becomes worth a little bit less over time than it used to, then they're going to need to make more money off of that 1 gallon of milk. So instead of saying, oh, well, my milk, I need to make $1 is worth $1, I'm going to sell this for $1, my gallon of milk. Now the dollar is only worth half of what it was, so now they have to charge $2 in order to make the same amount of money. That is inflation. Because the dollar is worth less, prices have to go up, and people have a hard time keeping up. If you make $10 an hour and milk is $1 a gallon, it's 10% of your hourly wage. But if your price of milk goes up to $30 or $3 a gallon and you're still only getting paid $10 an hour, that goes up to 30% of your hourly wage. So the price of things is going up. Your money that you still have is still the same. So now you're spending more and getting the same amount, which means you have left over for other things. If you have $1,000 to spend every week and your budget of food was, 50% of it, well, that means you had 50% for other stuff. But with inflation, prices go up, and maybe now 70% of your budget is now food. So now you only have 30% to pay for everything else. What happens is that Jackson leaves office and the economy isn't suffering these effects of inflation yet, but the prosperity that the nation is seeing is kind of fake. It's like a balloon. It has very little substance. After Jackson, Martin Van Buren takes office, and soon after, a panic takes place. Just like I was talking about with the banks earlier. If you heard that 2 towns over that, there wasn't any money in a bank, then, you're probably going to go and get your money out of your bank, and everybody else is going to hear about that, and it's just going to keep going, and banks are going to start closing down and closing down. Now, in today's world, that doesn't happen because the banks are insured by the national government. So if a bank runs out of money, you still get your money. But at this time, this is a panic. This becomes known as the Panic of 1837. People begin to exchange paper money for gold and silver, and the banks run out of that gold and silver. They close their doors. There's no more money to give to people. So if you had $10,000 in the bank and your bank goes out of business, you're out of luck because you just lost $10,000. This is Martin Van Buren. He's the 8th president of the United States. He needs to do something different with his hair and chin action. After this Panic of 1837, a depression sets in. A severe economic slump follows because people are losing their money from bank failures. That means that they cannot go buy new things. Inflation is causing them not to have as much money to buy extra things. Companies and factories aren't producing as much, and if they aren't producing as much, they don't need as many workers. And if they don't need as many workers, they're going to lay off people and fire people, which means that even more people have less money, which means even more people are going to spend less, which means even more factories are going to go out of business, and so on and so forth. And it's just a big circle. Almost all factories in the East close, and people had no way to pay for food or rent, and many start going hungry and became homeless. Van Buren becomes pretty unpopular. He faces a new political party in his campaign for re-election in 1840, the Whig Party. The Whigs opposed the concentration of power in a chief executive. They refer to Andrew Jackson as King Andrew because they say that he just did everything that he wanted to do and didn't follow what Congress wanted to do. The Whigs believe that Congress, not the president, represents the will of the people, which makes sense when you think about it because Congress is the one that is directly representative of the people. They are voted in by the people in smaller settings in like districts and senators. There's only a few from each state and everything. The president represents the entire nation, so he doesn't have the ability to really take into account what every area of the country wants or needs. In 1840, the Whigs choose William Henry Harrison, who is the guy with the tie over here, or the black scarf thing. It's not really a tie, I guess. William Henry Harrison, he runs for president. John Tyler, who is the guy that has 10 by his name, is his running mate, so he's going to run for vice president. During the campaign, the Whigs emphasized personality rather than political issues. William Henry Harrison is like this frontiersman, big cowboy kind of deal, war hero. He wants, everybody to know all the awesome stuff he did. Harrison wins the election. Unfortunately for William Henry Harrison, he ran a campaign and he talked about, I'm not too old to be president. I'm a frontiersman. I can do anything anybody else wants to do. He goes and gives his inaugural address. He's like, I'm great. I'm so happy I won the presidency. He stands out in the pouring rain. It's cold. He doesn't wear a coat. He gets pneumonia. And he dies 31 days later. So he becomes president, dies 31 days later after he's inaugurated. And so he was 9th president for 31 days. And then John Tyler becomes the 10th president of the United States. So that's a weird little thing about the election of 1840. But it shows the importance of the American West in politics because now it's not just about the North and the South. You have to also factor in all the people that are moving out to the West and living in the West as well. It's not just about the factories in the North and slavery in the South. It's also about all those people that are moving into the West, and it kind of opens up a whole new frontier for American politics. So that is a brief shot of Andrew Jackson's policies and Jacksonian democracy and kind of what he causes in the immediate aftermath of his presidency, and the effect that sectionalism and nationalism had on it.